Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to this first Q&A session of a four-part series on the TSI revision package. I am Cyril Martin, Communication Officer, and I'm honored to be your moderator. As you know, the TSI revision package 2023, adopted by the Railway Interoperability and Safety Committee on the 30th of March of this year, has now been published and has come into effect on the 20th of September. To give you the opportunity to ask as many questions as possible and to give us the chance to answer them, we have decided to organize 4 Q&A sessions, each focused on a specific theme. The dates for the upcoming sessions are currently displayed on the screen. Mark them on your calendars. We have provided you with the option to send us your questions in advance. And of course, the chat is open to you throughout the duration of the sessions. We will do our best to address questions asked during the live session as well, but priority will be given to questions received in advance. Last but not least, to ensure a focused and productive discussion, we kindly request that you limit your questions to the specific themes and topics covered in each of these sessions. Today, we will focus on rolling stock and onboard CCS. To discuss these topics, I am pleased to welcome Antoine Defossé and Nordine Boussouf, project officers within the rolling stock and fixed installations unit at ERA, and Juan Hernández Fernández, project officer within the ERTMS unit at ERA. And to relay your questions, I am pleased to hand over the floor to my colleague, João Gaspar. Please, João, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Cyril, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me briefly introduce myself. I'm João Gaspar from the ERA Academy, and I'm very happy to be here with this initiative that has been created by the agency in order to try and cater for the questions that we have received. We have received many questions through the email address. Many of them were related to the same topics. Therefore, we have decided to respond them collectively through presentations that my colleagues will deliver to you right away. Please note that we try to group these questions in a way that by answering one generic questions, we are able to answer questions that are very specific to the same topic. I would like now to start with explaining a little bit what we are going to go through. If we can have the following presentation, please. Thank you. So now we are going to talk about the new transition regime, which involves the changes that are occurring on the TSIs LOC&PAS, PRM, noise, wagon, and CCS. Next slide, please. So here we will inform about the changes in the implementation of TSIs in particular, and explain the key principles and highlight the advantages of the new scheme. We would also like to explain the impacts on the EC certification of subsystems and interoperable constituents, and a general information about the application of the TSIs. But of course, there are questions that are very burning in the hearts of applicants and external stakeholders out there. And I think that many of them, at least the first questions that come into people's mind is, how is my project impacted? And will I need to move to the latest TSIs? In order to answer this, I would like to bring the floor to my colleague Nordine. Can you please, Nordine, give us some lights about these two questions and how we can answer them?
Good morning, everybody. On the first questions about how the new transition regime can impact my project, we have two situations: the case of new rolling stock type project, and the case of ongoing project. For new rolling stock design, they shall comply with the TSI in force, which means after entry into force of the TSI revision, new rolling stock type shall comply with the new TSI. This is not applicable to ongoing project. Ongoing project, there are cases of projects that are in what we call phase A, in design phase, or phase B, in production phase, at the entry into force of the TSI 2023. So if a project is in phase A or phase B, it is possible to continue to use the set of TSIs that were defined in the beginning of the phase A, so in the beginning of the design phase, or to migrate to the new TSI revision, especially for projects that are in design phase. This is a decision of the applicant. Another situation is especially with projects that are in design phase. In the rolling stock TSIs, there is a specific provision allowing an applicant that has started a design project to use either totally or for particular sections of the new revised TSI. This is a choice of the applicant. So for specific TSI provision, he can decide to use the specific clause in the new TSI. Of course, this is to be justified and documented and assessed by the notified body.
Oh, we cannot hear you. You are muted.
Many thanks, Nordin. I would like to continue with the next question, which also has been coming into our email box quite frequently, which is, what are the main changes on the TSI's requirements for chapters 4, 5, and 6? And for this, I would like to call my colleague Antoine in order to tell us a bit about these changes.
Thank you, Joao. Yes, we received many questions about the changes brought by the new TSI. And if we go to the next slide, please. Then you see that for the first time in the TSIs themselves, so in the TSI about rolling stock and CCS, we have listed all the changes. So in each TSI, there is a specific appendix, a new appendix, in which all the changes compared to the previous version are listed. It's Appendix A for the TSI wagon, and you have the text of the TSI wagon here. It's Appendix L for the TSI LOC&PAS, and you have the text also for TSI LOC&PAS. What is important to mention is that for everything that is not mentioned in this specific appendix with the changes, the conformity with the previous TSI is deemed equivalent to conformity with the new TSI. So I think this is a significant change. For the first time, all the changes are listed in the TSIs themselves. It's not up to the manufacturers or to the applicant to make the analysis of both versions to see what has changed. This is provided in the TSI. Next slide, Nordin, please. So I said there is a specific appendix in all those TSIs. So for the TSI LOC&PAS, it's Appendix L. And you see there are two tables, Table 1 and Table 2 each time in this specific appendix. Table 1 listing changes with a transition regime of 7 years, what we call the generic transition regime. And a second table, which is on the next slide, which lists the changes with a specific transition regime. So all that is not in these two tables is considered as equivalent from the previous version to the next version, meaning that conformity with the previous TSI leads to conformity with the next TSI. We will detail a little bit later what are the differences between the specific transition regime and the generic transition regime. Next slide, please, Nordin. So you have these changes listed in the TSI wagon in Appendix A, And similarly, Appendix L in LOC&PAS, P in PRM, H in noise, and B in CCS will list all the changes.
Many thanks, Antoine. And I would like to continue as well, because there is a lot of questions about what are the definitions. And I think that something that also is come up very strongly is what are the impacts to the NOBO assessment? I think it's a question that has come and it's very important. So could you please tell us a bit about this, Antoine?
Yes, for the transition regime, we have 4 definitions. We have defined 2 phases, the design phase and the production phase. So the design phase starts with the contract placed with the NOBO and ends with the delivery of the type certificate or design examination certificate. And then the production phase starts also with the same time and ends and runs as long as it is possible to deliver in conformity to the type. The production phase, in fact, is the period of validity of the type. So we have these 2 phases. We have also defined the set of TSIs applicable at the beginning of the design phase when contracting the NOBO, which is called the initial assessment framework, and at the end of the design phase when delivering the type certificate, which we call the certification framework. So on the next slide, you can see these definitions pictured on a typical project. You see on the left, beginning of the design phase, contractualization with the notified body, and the initial assessment framework is the set of TSIs applicable at that time. At the end of the design phase, there is the delivery of the type or design examination certificate, and the set of TSIs applicable at that time is called the certification framework. And so many may say, okay, this is exactly the same as phase A, phase B, they just changed the name, but this is not true. So we can go to the next slide, we will see a first difference, significant difference. So none of these phases is limited in time. At the moment, you know, the phase A is limited to 7 years for LOC&PAS and 4 years for Wagon. And the phase B, production phase, is limited to 7 years also for LOC&PAS and 10 years for Wagons. Here, with this new design phase and production phase, there is no limit in time. I mean that they can last, the design phase can last as long as necessary, and the production phase can last as long as possible. So this is the first change, and the second change is also important and probably a bit scary for manufacturers that participate today, is that the type certificate is not issued according to the TSIs applicable at the beginning of the design phase. So is not issued according to the initial assessment framework, which is the case now with the phase A. The phase A is somehow freezing the TSIs applicable until the delivery of the type certificate. Now the type certificate is delivered according to the certification framework, so the TSI is applicable at the end of the design phase. And I remind also there is an exception for this revision because it is the first one. So for this revision, it's possible to continue with the phase A, phase B principle. So this may be a little bit scary, but we will explain why we did that. So we can go to the next slide. So what we write here is the text of the Wagon TSI. I will not read it completely. You have exactly the same text in the LOC&PAS TSI 71312 and in the CCS TSI. The principle is that the notified body will deliver the type certificate according to the certification framework, so the TSI is applicable at the end of the design phase. But as I said, we have transitions for each TSI change that is listed in the appendix. So it means that those TSI changes that are listed in the appendix will not apply to ongoing project before a certain period of time. Somehow we have introduced for each TSI change a transition period for the change itself. It's included in the TSI. So I think this is really important, and it will be a little bit more explained on the next slide. Voilà. So what is important to recall is that all TSI changes are listed and categorized. There are two categories we will explain a bit later. The compliance with the previous TSI is deemed equivalent to the compliance with the new TSI, except for those changes that are listed. And there are two types of changes, those with a generic transition regime. So these requirements do not apply during 7 years for all projects that are ongoing at the date of publication of the TSI, and changes with a specific transition regime we will explain a little bit more later. So just to make it clear, here you have, for example, a picture where you have a design phase started with an initial assessment framework. Let's call it TSI ENE, with a set of TSI ENE. During the design, there is a new set of TSI entering into force, TSIs ENE+1. So the conformity with TSI ENE leads to conformity with TSI ENE+1, except for the changes that are listed in the appendix. But for those changes, there is a transition of 7 years for the generic transition, and there are some changes with a specific transition regime. So this is defined for each change. So it gives the possibility to finalize the design phase and to have the type certificate delivered according to the TSIs ENE+1 without applying the new requirement because of this transition, which is associated to all the changes listed in the appendix of the TSI. Next slide shows the same in case there are two TSIs entering into force during the design phase. It's exactly the same. All the changes now have a transition regime associated. So that's why we do not limit the design phase, because if the design phase is very, very long, that's the case for some projects. Design phase is very, very long. In that case, sooner or later, it will be necessary to apply the TSI, the new TSI requirement. But it gives some visibility for the manufacturer, because when the TSI is entering into force, there is 7 years before the changes are applicable. And just to recall that it's also permitted to use new TSIs for some specific point, but Nordine already mentioned it earlier.
Many thanks, Antoine. You mentioned that it has been mentioned several times about this regime of 7 years, but what does it exactly mean? What is the meaning behind this transition regime, and what does it mean, the specific transition regime that is now coming into force? I would like to call Nordine to answer this, please.
In fact, we will remind some points already explained. There, as explained by my colleagues Antoine, each change in the TSI requirements are now in the appendix, and we had 3 categories of change without any impact to the TSI, change that may have impact with either a specific generic transition regime or a specific shortened transition regime. For the change without impact to the TSI, the compliance with the previous versions of the TSI give compliance with the new version of the TSI. For the generic transition regime, such TSI evolution will have a 7 years period of transition, which means that the compliance with the previous TSI does not lead automatically to conformity with the new version. And we allow a 7 years period to continue to use the previous TSI. And then we have a last category of transition regime that we call specific transition regime. Such TSI evolution, clearly application of previous version of the TSIs will not ensure conformity with the new version. And when we have such type of TSI change is generally because they address a critical issue concerning the safety or technical compatibility, or they address a specific policy objective in a proportionate manner. So what is important to in a summary is that we have changes with no impact, changes with a 7 years generic transition regime, and changes with a specific transition regime as soon as it is linked to safety, technical compatibility, or policy objective. Here it's example with the TSI LOC&PAS Appendix L. So we have two tables. The first table, table L1, give the set of requirements where we have a change and a transition regime of 7 years. An important point to highlight is that projects that are in production phase or rolling stock in operation are not affected by this appendix. They continue to be manufactured or operated as manufactured in conformity to the EC type examination certificate already delivered and operated without the need to modify the rolling stock. Then we have another group, another example with change with a specific transition regime. It corresponds to table L2 in the TSI LOC&PAS as example. And the example here is about the train interface, the rolling stock interface with a TCS, where we indicated that for such modification, there is a specific transition regime. As we deal with interface with ERTMS, the related transition regime may impact the design phase not started, design phase started, production phase, or unit in operation. For this example, we refer to the Appendix B of the TSI CCS, where there are the explanation of the transition regime. This will be further explained by my colleague presenting the CCS example on transition regime.
Many thanks, Nordine. And of course, we now go to the most important, if not one of the most important questions, which is the impact on the EC certificates and for the EC types as well. So I think that the first question is, what is the generic impact to the EC certificate? And following that question, a lot of people ask if the EC type certificate still has the validity end. And to finish, can you please explain a bit about the impact of TSIs to the KMS approval? And I think I will continue with Nordine in order to answer these questions, please.
On the impact of the new transition regime to the type certificates delivered by the notified body, here it's a reminder about what Antoine already explained. Is in fact a new novelty introduced with the TSI is that now an EC type examination certificates will have unlimited validity unless it is required in a new TSI revision that there are some specific changes with specific transition regime requiring modification. So what is important to retain is that only the change to the TSI with specific transition regime can apply to vehicles in production phase or in operation. For vehicles that are, for the changes that have a generic transition regime of 7 years, there is no impact to the production phase, and the EC type examination certificates will have an unlimited validity until the possible new TSI requiring specific transition regime. It's an important evolution in the TSI because in the past, for rolling stock TSIs or wagon TSIs, we had always a time limitation for the production phase. Here is about the second questions, the impact to the QMS approval. This picture shows that, gives an example where you have received already, for example, an EC type examination certificate based on TSI ENE. And during your production phase, you have an entry into force of TSI N+1. As explained, the change with generic transition regime are not impacting the vehicle in production. Only change with specific transition regime may require to deliver a new type certificate. And at the time the applicant started the production, for that he already received a QMS approval. The example provided here is about the application of module SD. So at the time of the entry of the production, the applicant has already a QMS approval with a certain validity time. When the NOBO make the surveillance audit and the renewal of the type certificate, when he will arrive with the TSI N+1, the QMS approval certificates may refer either to the TSI N or to the TSI N+1, depending if there was some modification introduced to the vehicle that generate a new type certificate. If nothing happens, the SD certificate QMS approval can still refer to the TSI N, but if there was a new type certificate using the TSI N+1, it will refer to TSI N+1.
Many thanks, Nordine. I think that was pretty clear. And another question that it's quite genuine, especially for the applicants, is how the transition regimes will apply to the type variants and versions. I think that's a very important question, and I would like to call Antoine to answer this.
Thank you, Joao. So I said at the beginning, we have what we call the initial assessment framework, which is the set of TSIs applicable at the beginning of a project. So what we have specified in the TSIs, LOC&PAS, wagon, and CCS. We mentioned LOC&PAS, wagon, and CCS because for PRM and noise, they just make reference to the LOC&PAS and to the wagon. We have not copied everything in the PRM and noise. So what we have here in those TSI is to explain that the initial assessment framework is common to the main type and to the variants and the versions. So it means that a variant or a version, even if its design phase is starting after the publication of a new set of TSIs, will have the same initial assessment framework. So it means that they will benefit from the transition regime defined in this new set of TSIs. So for example, if the main type is starting in 2023 now, and there is a new set of TSIs published in 2025 and a variant starting just after the new set of TSIs, it will be considered that the initial assessment framework of this variant is 2020, the TSI applicable in 2023, meaning that this variant will benefit from the transition regime for all the changes brought by the TSI 2025. So this is also, I think, a significant change that gives more visibility in order to produce variants of types.
Many thanks for the clarification. And what about the rolling stock interoperable constituents? How will these transition regimes apply to them? Can you please elaborate a bit on this, Antoine, on the same lines?
Yes, so for interoperability constituents, next slide, please. So the current regime is that they have also a type certificate and a validity of 5 years for LOC&PAS and 10 years for wagons, period during which the constituent can be placed on the market. For CCS, there is no similar provision, but what we have also introduced for the new TSI is the unlimited validity of the certificates for the constituents. What is important to note is that the transition, the definitions that we have set up, design phase, production phase, initial assessment framework, certification framework, apply at the level of the subsystem. And the transition for the requirements apply at the level of the subsystem, but of course, they may impact some interoperability constituents. When an interoperability constituent is impacted by a requirement listed in the specific appendix of the TSI, the applicant can either use an IC certified with the previous TSI or with the new TSI. So this is explained in 2 examples. You will have a look also at the technical opinions that we delivered in 2016 about the interoperability constituents, where we explained that interoperability constituents need to comply with the TSIs in force at the time of their certification. So it means that the interoperability constituent already needed, it was already required for them to apply the latest TSI. But let's go to see 2 examples maybe. No, this is just a confirmation of what I said at the beginning, that the type of or design examination of constituent remains valid. So when fitting a constituent into a subsystem, let's take the example of headlamps. In the TSI 2020, we refer to a standard version from 2016. In 2023, we refer to a standard from year 2020, but this change is not listed in the Appendix L of the LOC&PAS TSI. So it means that compliance with the EN 15153 from 2016 is equivalent to compliance with the version from 2020. It's automatic, there is no evolution. So for the manufacturer of the constituent, it's possible to deliver ICs as long as the certificate is valid, according to the type, according to the standard from 2016. But once the certificate is no longer valid, then the IC manufacturer will have the headlamp certified according to the new TSI with unlimited validity. And for the applicant, it's possible to use any of the ICs because there is no, because this change being not listed in the Appendix L of LOC&PAS, it's considered a change with no impact. Another example is the interface for call for aid device. Here it's different because in the TSI we require a green or yellow background with a white symbol. TSI 23 requires a yellow background with a black symbol. So this change is listed in the Appendix P of the PRM TSI because compliance with the TSI 2020 obviously does not lead to compliance with TSI 2023. If you have a white symbol, it cannot be compliant with a black symbol. So the manufacturer of the IC can deliver ICs according to the TSI 2020 as long as it is valid, again. Once the certificate has expired, the manufacturer of the IC will deliver, will certify the IC according to the new TSI, TSI 2023, with a black symbol, but it's still possible to also produce a constituent according to the previous TSI for rolling stock where it will be installed, rolling stock compliant to the previous TSI. So here there is no backward validity. There is no backward compatibility, sorry. So it means that it's possible to manufacture ICs according to both TSIs. Of course, according to the previous TSI, the type validity will be limited to 5 years. According to the new TSI, there will be no limitation of validity. And according to the technical opinion I referred to, we should have mentioned it in the TSI PRM. We didn't do it, but we will mention it in the application guide of the TSI PRM, that as there is no backward compatibility for this interface of the call for aid device, it is permitted to build ICs according to both TSIs. So I think it closes the point for ICs, and I believe that we will now pass to CCS.
Many thanks, Antoine and Nordine. I think it was a very good session, this first part related to rolling stock, but I can see already now there's a lot of questions about the CCS TSI, and I think that's the hot cookie for today. And without further ado, I would like to invite my colleagues from CCS first to share their screen, and then we will pass to the questions, which I will guide. And I think we can see them now on the screen. Thank you so much. So I will start by telling that we received a lot of questions specifically for the CCS TSI, and the first 3 are about what are the different transition regimes, of course, for the CCS TSI, and how do they apply to the interoperability constituents, and where that information can be found. I would like to call to the floor my colleague Juan to answer these questions. Juan, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Joao. Good morning, everybody. So we will try to get more information on these questions. So in for the CCS TSI, we have the same definitions as for the other TSI. So we have aligned mostly with LOC&PAS TSI to have as much as possible a vehicle approach. So applicants can consider the vehicle and not to in a whole and not to the individual subsystems. The definitions for the phases are similar to the other ones. They are in the CCS TSI in section 7.4, and then in the main text of the CCS TSI you have the requirements you have to apply. But then if you need to know when you need to get to those requirements, then you need to go to Appendix B of CCS TSI, which is subdivided in 4 tables. The first table is B11, which indicates what are the transition regimes for the CCS onboard subsystem. Table B12 is for the rolling stock train detection compatibility requirements, because since this is an interface between CCS and rolling stock, the decision was taken to keep all requirements in CCS TSI, so there is a single point for all the information, but these requirements are applicable for rolling stock. Then table B2 is for the Trackside CCS subsystems transition regimes, and we have a specific table B3 that are for the requirements for interoperability constituents. Then getting into the questions about interoperability constituents, what is if they have a specific transition regime. In general, for CCS TSI, we have no specific transition regime for ICs. This means that the general transition regime that is defined for the subsystem is also applicable to the interoperability constituents. However, we have in table B3 4 exceptions. That means that you can apply the general table B1 or B2 transition regime, except for the 4 cases that are defined in table B3, that are mostly related to the error corrections procedure and also to the onboard train interface, the the common bus. But okay, you can find those examples in table B3. And finally, if you need to get more information, we are compiling all the questions we have from the sector, that we know that this subject is complex. So currently we are working on the update of the CCS TSI application guide. Now we are drafting it in cooperation with the sector in the CCS TSI working party. And then several updates are expected during next year, during 2024. So we will be covering some topics. Once they are ready and agreed, they will be published, but then this will be done in several stages. So if something is not covered in a first stage, probably this will come later in the process. And the second thing is that please, even if this is a lot of work for us, as Joao said, we have received many questions, please send them to us, because this helps us to better understand what are the most difficult points in the interpretation of the CCS TSI, and we can try to consider them in the drafting of the CCS TSI. So Joao, this is the answer to the first questions that we have received. I give back the floor to you.
Many thanks, Juan. And for the next questions, I would like us to take a deep breath, because there's a lot to go through. And so how the transition regimes are applied to the CCS onboard subsystem? I think that's the most generic question we want to ask. And also, when is it mandatory to actually implement the ETCS on board? Another question that has also come a lot into our inbox was if it's still possible to use the set of specs from the previous TSI on the onboard CCS subsystem. And finally, because of the novelty and with the ATO implementation, when is it actually mandatory to implement new functionalities? For example, ATO on the onboard CCS subsystem. Can you give us some lights on this, Juan, please?
Yes, we will try to get more information on this. So in this second set of slides, we have focused on the questions related to the onboard subsystems. The questions and different situations in the projects are many and many different. So we will just try to provide some general examples on how to apply Appendix B. So first things we are covering is when is mandatory to implement ETCS in the onboard. In general, you have seen that many of the exceptions that were before in the CCS TSI has been removed. This is following the necessary impulse to the deployment of ETCS. So then that now in many more cases, then it's a mandatory implementation of ETCS. So you will find that in section 7.2 of the CCS TSI. But then at the same time, it has been given some transition regime to those cases. So for example, in these texts are extracted for the draft CCS TSI application guide. So then this will be early next year available to everyone. They are currently on review. But we have considered the case that you have a vehicle that is not equipped to... No, is not equipped with ETCS. Sorry, I have a small glip. So, sorry, this example indicates when... Sorry, I got lost. So then the definition is depending on which is the status of the design of the CCS subsystem. There are different deadlines where this requirement that is mandatory to build to install ETCS on all newly built vehicles are need to be applied. So if the design phase was not started, it was started after the TSI enters into force, then you have to install ETCS on all newly built vehicles. If your design has started before the TSI was in force, then there is some delay. So then the design phase needs to be finished before. If the design phase is not finished before 1st January 2028, then, or if we say the reverse, if the CCS, if the design phase is finished after 1st January 2028, is mandatory to install ETCS. And then for those vehicles that are already in production phase, then it's only mandatory from 1st January 2030. So the general TSI requirement is all newly built vehicle has to be equipped, but depending on which is the situation of your project, if the design phase was started before or it's already in production phase, the actual date, well, this is mandatory, it's the one as I explained. Usually all the dates are, the transitionary dates finish around 28 or 2030. So to give you a general approach, and it is about 7 years. Then the second example was if I have a vehicle that is already equipped, so it's already or is based on this former set of specs, then the CCS TSI provides a transition regime in order to make the transition from the former set of specs to the new specifications in CCS TSI, which is called Baseline 4 Release 1. So if a vehicle is already equipped, and this vehicle, the example we are considering is a vehicle that is already equipped with the former set 2, that is means that it has ETCS system version 2.0, and then this vehicle is okay, and that the ETCS part does not need to be modified and is ready to be operated in the intended area of use, then this still can be produced until 2030. So if then for all these former set of specs, it's also important that you will need also to consider the error corrections, because the main difference between the former set of specs and the new approach in the CCS TSI 2023 is that all the error corrections has been included, and the specifications are now debugged. So the answer to this case is if you have a vehicle that is according to system version 2.0 and is already in production phase, this production phase can continue until 2030. And then regarding what happens with the new functionality, so the two previous questions were more about what happened if I have not installed ETCS or if I have already an existing installation based on the former specs. In this case, we are looking about the enhancements. So the main enhancement that is now potentially deployed for the IMs is ATO. And then the new TSI includes a new notification regime from the IM where these new functions will be deployed trackside and then eventually became mandatory to the onboard. So then these notifications by the IM are made in RINF. And then once they are made, there are a 5 years period to become applicable. So in the example, sorry, 1 second. In the example, if an IM notifies in 2026 that a line will be equipped with ATO, then it takes 5 years to become applicable. So that means that if your design phase started after 2026, you need to consider the directly. So sorry, after the notification from the IM, any project that is started after that date needs to consider this requirement. But if the project was started before this notification date, there are 5 years to become where you don't need to become compliant with this requirement. So that means that if the notification from the IM is done from 1st January 2026, all the same phase that are started after that date needs to consider that requirement, so it needs to consider the ATO onboard functionality and install it. And projects that were started before that, they need to finish the design phase before 1st of January 2031. That means that from the moment that the IM makes notifications, all ongoing projects has 5 years to adapt or to finish before that adaptation, and all new projects that are started from the notification from the IM needs to consider that requirement directly. Of course, ATO is an optional functionality, but in order to allow that the system benefits overall also from Trackside and onboard from this functionality, if the IM is investing in this functionality, after a time it's expected that the trains running on that sections are also implementing this functionality. So that are the 3 main approaches we have for the CCS onboard deployment. And sorry for the small glimpse I have at the beginning because I was confused by some dates. So I give the floor back to Joao.
Many thanks, Juan, and no problem for the glitch. It's technology, it happens. I would like to focus now, Juan, on these 3 specific questions. First question is, how is it possible to use the set of specs from the previous TSI on the Trackside CCS subsystem? The second question is, what about the transition regime from the GSMR on the Trackside from baseline 1 to baseline 1 maintenance release 1? And the third question is, how is this transition regime stated or noted in the document ERATV 033-281 and the differences between version 4.0 to version 5.0? Can you please clarify a bit, Juan, on these 3 questions? I know they're a bit different, but could you please give us a bit more of an overview about them?
Yes, we will go through this. This last set of questions are focusing more on the Trackside. As someone was already grading on the questions, the main objective of this webinar was focusing on the vehicle transition regimes. That's what we group the rolling stock and the CCS. But it's true that if we consider transition regime in general, also we receive many questions about how this is applicable for Trackside. So we have decided to make a small set of answers for how this transition regime is specifically applied for CCS Trackside subsystems. So the first question is how we have talked before about the set of specs for the onboard, the previous set of specs, and now we have the same question, but how this is applicable for Trackside. In this case, there is a specific section in the sheet in the TSI, which is 7412, which covers 2 different cases: how we apply set 1 and how you apply set 2 and 3. For those, there are some preconditions that are on the main paragraph of the sections, and then some conditions that you need to fulfill afterwards during the deployment. The preconditions, so the conditions needed to be able to apply previous set of specs. For set 1 is that, as listed there, you have to have a relevant previous deployment on that set of specs. So more than 1,000 kilometers, so 25% of the core network is equipped before 31st of December of 2020. So if you meet this requirement, you can still deploy based on set 1. For set 2 and 3, then the requirement is that you need to have lines in operation before the date of entry into force of the CCS TSI. This means that if the IM has invested Trackside and there is part of the network that is already equipped and in operation according to this set of specs, then they can continue growing or extending this network on the basis of the same set of specs during certain years. So if you are eligible to apply the former set of specs, then you have to meet some conditions that you need to keep in the future. So for set 1, you need to notify to the European Commission, because then, as you know, set 1 is already phased out is the former baseline 2, and now the reference is from baseline 3 onwards. And then in all cases, what is really crucial, and is one of the new elements of the CCS TSI, is the error correction procedure needs to be applied. This means that the trackside needs to be maintained in order to allow all TSI compliance vehicles to operate. So mostly you need to apply all error corrections to avoid all potential issues. And then for how long you can use this former set of specs on the trackside? For new projects, you have 7 years. And then for upgrade or renewals, you can still use them for 10 years. So, but then to finish this is if you want to apply the former set of specs, but also the CCS TSI includes into the specification the possibility for the trackside to still deploy the previous system versions. So system version 1.1, 1.0, 2.0, 2.1 that are still possible to be deployed trackside according to SRS Chapter 6. So these specifications already includes all the error correction needed. So if you have a trackside that is deployed according to system version 1.0, and then you want to still be compliant with former vehicles, you are not forced to use higher system versions, even if you are using the latest set of specifications. Then the 2 last questions are about GSMR and train detection compatibility. On GSMR, what has been done in the latest CCS TSI is to do a maintenance release. That means that no new mandatory interoperability requirements has been introduced. So then basically the same principle as before applies. That means that you just need to, you can still use the former set of specs P1, but considering all necessary maintenance or adaptations in order to allow interoperability trains to be able to operate. If you don't want to do an ad hoc analysis, you can directly shift to the new set of specs where all these errors are already considered. So we encourage to use this, but of course there is the same principle for former set of specs applies. And then finally, from the train detection compatibility, the interface document that describes how the interfaces between the train detection systems trackside and the rolling stock, mostly on the frequencies, are the electromagnetic compatibility. Then for the trackside, the version 5 is directly applicable, but then there are some transition conditions that is described in Chapter 7. But then we will get into more details about train detection compatibility in a future webinar. So thanks for your questions, Joao, so far. And then I give the floor back to you. And
many thanks, Juan. I think it was a good round of questions, and also your explanations and the other colleagues as well. We received a lot of questions. I can see here on the chat, there's a lot of questions coming in, which is a good sign. However, due to the limit of time, we are not able to answer all of the questions. What we will do is our colleagues have selected a few, and we'll try to answer those during the session because we're limited on time. But please don't worry. If you don't get your question answered today, you can always email us. You can contact us later. No problem. We're here to help. I think I will start and tackle the first question here. The question says, thank you for the webinar. We have a question related to system version 2.1. During the transition regime, 2 different system versions, 2.1, are going to live together. Okay. One according to the previous TSI and a second one according to the new TSI. How are we going to name both of them? Thank you. I think this is a question for Juan. Juan, what can you tell us about the name for these ones?
Yeah, it's true that according specifically for system version 2.1, we have 2 versions according to each of the TSI. And the main difference is that the one in the latest TSI, in the TSI 2023, includes already all the known errors as the solution to the all known errors. But it's true that it's still possible to use them. So basically the approach we have taken is that we will name it according to the TSI. So that will be that system version 2.1 according to CCS TSI 2016 or system version 2.1 according to CCS TSI 2023. So this will be the basic naming scheme, and we will try to reflect that mostly on ERATV on the register by adding some additional explanation or additional letters to the system version to be able to describe up to which level of corrections the system version 2.1 has been implemented on board. Because for the Trackside, what we expect is system version 2.1 is deployed, all system version 2.1 trains will be able to run according once the error correction procedure has been executed.
Many thanks. Thanks for the clarification, Juan. I have here another question. This one related for the LOC&PAS TSI. So it says an SD certificate for LOC&PAS is now valid for 2 years. Does it mean now that this 2 years validity period will be endless? It's a valid question, as long as there is no new TSI revision. And I think Nordin is better placed to answer this. Nordin, can you please provide us with an answer to this question?
Yes, as we explained, the concept of invalidity timeline is about the EC type examination certificate. So for an IC or a subsystem, it will be a SB SH1 type certificate or CB CH type certificates, which means that you, with these type certificates with unlimited validity, you are able to produce similar product compliant with the type. And the SD modules, the QMS approval is about the capacity of a manufacturer to manufacture product compliant to the type. So the SD certificates, the QMS approval has a validity of 2 years. As soon as you are still producing, you need to have a QMS approval approved by the NOBO. So this unlimited validity do not concern the QMS approval. It concerns only the type certificates, meaning that there is surveillance of the NOBO of the manufacturer coming and checking the capacity of the manufacturer to have a productions and control of the productions. And this checks is this QMS approval is valid 2 years. So after 2 years, there is a new audit ensuring that the manufacturer is still capable to manufacture product compliant to the EC type examination certificate.
Okay, thank you so much, Nordin. Don't leave just now. So that means that old certificates with time limit duration also remain valid, for example, after September 2030. Is that correct?
For the project that have started before the TSI 2023 amendment, as soon as you have received type certificates, the previous regime still applicable, phase A, phase B concept for the running stock subsystem. So if you received a type certificate in 2025, because you started with the TSI 2020, these type certificates applying the concept of phase A, phase B will have a validity until 2032. So yes, it's possible.
Many thanks. I think that's pretty clear. I would like to go now to another question also here in the chat, and it's, are notified bodies responsible for assessment of 7431 minimum 5 years announcement for ETCS only? And if yes, how should they deal with it? Is it necessary to address every specific route in the network statement? I think that this is a question for Juan. Juan, would you be able to tell us a bit about this, please?
Yes, but sorry, can you repeat it again? Because there are so many questions that I haven't. Can you help me again with the question to identify
Yes.
which one?
Yes. I'll read it again. So are notified bodies responsible for assessment of 7431 minimum 5 years announcement for ETCS only? And if so, how should they deal with it? Is it necessary to address every specific route in the network statement? I would say no, but let me hear from you.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. And sorry for today. It's not my. So yeah, no. In principle, we used to say that notified bodies are responsible for checking the complete CCS TSI, which includes Chapter 7 also. But being more pragmatic, usually TSI requirement basic parameters are in Chapter 4. Chapter 5 defines the interoperability constituent, and Chapter 6 defines the assessment requirement. So usually Chapter 7 is not formally checked, but then in these cases is part of the requirement capture of the applicant. So I don't know if this has to be the novo for sure is not need to check every route in the network statement, because this will be part of the route compatibility. But in general, we don't like to restrict the novo assessment only to chapters 4 to 6, but they are assessing the complete CCS TSI. But in this particular case, they don't need to go through every route in the network statement.
Many thanks. Okay, thank you so much, Juan. Another question we have here is about new PRM. This removed displays from new PRM removed displays from IC list. How must be managed in already certified display as IC? I think this is maybe Antoine. Maybe Antoine can answer this. Antoine, would you be able to help us with this question?
Thank you, Joe. I'll do my best. Indeed, the displays are no longer interoperability constituents for rolling stock and infrastructure, because the requirements to be assessed at IC level were not really convenient for the assessment at IC level. This is not listed as a change in the table P, or in the appendix P of the PRM TSI, so in appendix listing the changes, meaning that compliance with the previous TSI, where the displays are ICs, leads to compliance to the next TSI, where the displays are not ICs anymore. So it means that the already existing interoperability constituent will be able to be used until the end of validity of their certificate, and then the assessment of this requirement will be done at subsystem level and not anymore at interoperability constituent level.
Many thanks. Okay, thank you so much. Don't leave just yet, Antoine. I've got another one for you. The legal part of the TSI LOC&PAS modified versions 2019 or 2020 limits the possibility to place on the market vehicles complying with these versions until 31st of September 2028. Considering the suppression of Article 11.3 of the legal part of the TSI LOC&PAS in the 2023 modification, is it possible to place on the market vehicles compliant with 2019 or 2020 version after the 31st of December 2028, as long as the EC certificate remains valid? It's a long question.
I will answer yes.
Okay.
No, it's a legal question. So we have had a discussion with our legal colleagues to ensure that the answer is really yes, because what is important to have in mind is that the TSI, in fact, is an annex to a regulation. The annex of the regulation itself is applicable, and the regulation gives the possibility to apply one or the other version of a TSI according to the TSI. But when the regulation comes into force, it is fully applicable to all projects. Projects that apply the TSI 2023 like projects that apply the TSI 2020. So this article 11.3 has been removed, and it's removed for everyone. So the answer is yes.
Many thanks. Thank you so much for the clarification, Antoine. I will now go to another question. It's a long one as well. It's a CCS related. So you have clarified that the transition phase as defined by the CCS TSI for subsystems applies only to IC. Okay. More particularly to the possibility Annex 1 Appendix B1.3 of use of specifications coming from the previous TSI CCS is submitted to the demonstration that the subsystem was in the design phase as per 7241113 before the entry into force of the new TSI, the proof being the contract between the NOBO for the subsystem assessment. Considering the above clarification, we assume that this is very proof NOBO contract for subsystem covers the relevant IC as well. Is that correct? I would say so, but Juan, what's your take on this?
Yes, thanks, Joao. Yes, I think that the same proof or the same design phase to demonstrate that the project is in the design phase applies also for the IC. So this contract for the NOBO also applies. I must also say that in the CCS TSI under Chapter 6, it's also possible to use ICs certified according previous TSI as long as the requirement remains unchanged and they are also fulfill the requirements of the new CCS TSI. For example, Eurobalises that requirement has not changed. So if they are certified according previous TSI, they can still be used according to the they can be used certified according to the previous TSI also for the new TSI. But for the cases of you are using, for example, the ETCS onboard, EBC component, interoperability constituent, if the project is already in design phase and then they will be deployed according to set 2, then interoperability constituents according to set 2 can also be used using the same proof. So the short answer is yes.
Many thanks, Juan, for the clarification. Don't go just yet because I have another one. We do understand that there is a legal obligation for the CCS equipment manufacturers to produce corrective versions of IC independently of the contracts in force. Is that correct?
Yes. So then, in the error correction procedure, in the section 7 to 10 of the CCS TSI, it is foreseen that suppliers needs to make available the back version. So, or then error corrected versions. There are a transition regime that before 2026, then you don't need to provide the full IC updated with all the change requests, but all the necessary one. But from 2026, for the legal releases of the TSI that are published after 2026, they need to produce this. This means that not only for existing projects, but for new projects, in order to place on the market these constituents, they need to be according to the CCS TSI. And then in order to fulfill this, they need to include all the error corrections after this date of 1st January 2026. So basically, yes, they need to provide this independently of the contract. But of course, this needs to be also adapted to each contract and to how the error corrections procedure is applied to each of the existing contracts.
Many thanks. Many thanks for that, Juan. I would like to also tackle another question, this time related to not to CCS. For an ongoing project, design phase started before the 28th of September 2023. Okay, so we're back to the design phase. Voluntarily applying TSI 2023 version. Can certificates be issued before 2030, even if all technical requirements from Annex L are still fulfilling the TSI version 2020? Can you confirm that the no type limitation applies to vehicle authorization in conformity to type? Examples for different scenarios of ongoing projects would be appreciated. Okay. Antoine, I think you're best placed to answer this. Would you be able to give us a few lights on this?
Yes, thank you, João. I will ask Nordine, maybe you could display the slide number 42, where we have shown this. Voilà. So this is a slide which, okay, may be a little bit complex, but I will try to explain. It's to illustrate the possibility to switch to the TSI 2023 or not for projects that are already in design phase. So on the first case is an ongoing project. So in both cases, we imagine a project starting on the 1st of January 2021. Well, here we have put the entry into force of the package on the 1st of July to, it was more convenient because it's exactly in the middle of the year. But it's the same. They entered into force on the 28th of September, but it's the same. So in the first case, you have a project which started, phase A on 1st January 2021. Applying the TSI package applicable at that time, let's call it the TSIs 2020, TSIs 20. And this project will decide not to switch to the new package. And so the phase A lasts a maximum of 7 years, so until end of 2027 maximum. Then there is a type certificate delivered according to the TSIs 2020, and there is a phase B that lasts a maximum of 7 years. And then no more conformity to type possible because the type is not valid anymore. So now we take the same project, we say, okay, this project starting again on the 1st of January 2021, but decides to move to apply the new package. The package enters into force now, mid-2023, so the phase A becomes the design phase. Again, the phase A design phase lasts 7 years exactly. So meaning that the type certificate is delivered at the end of 2027, but now the certification framework is the set of TSIs 2023. And you will see that here, the requirements with the generic transition regime, so those that are listed in Appendix L, Table 1, are not yet applicable. It means that practically, for all these requirements that have changed, it will not be necessary for the project to apply the new requirements. And then the production phase is not limited in validity anymore. So I think it illustrates a little bit the question. The possibility, I think each project needs really to assess if it's interesting or not to apply the new TSIs. Because due to the fact that there is a transition for all these new requirements and the fact that they are not applicable until 2030 for most of them, it can be interesting to move to the new regime and to be certified according to the TSI package 2023. Voilà. I hope it answers the question.
Many thanks, Antoine. And before you disappear, I would like to ask a more generic question. When can, it's out of the scope of this webinar, but since you're on the floor, I'll ask you directly. When can it be expected a consolidation version of the OPE TSI?
There are several questions in the chat about the consolidated version of TSIs. It's in the hand of the Commission. It's not in our hands, and it's not in the hands of our counterpart, the Commission. So the DG Move, it's in the hands of the DG Translation, and so we don't know at all when the consolidated version will be published. Normally, it's approximately 1 month after the entry into force of of the text. So meaning that it should be in the coming days, but this is completely out of our control, so we don't know at all.
Many thanks, Antoine. Very, very honest answer. One more. This is related to the CCS TSI. When will we publish the new application guide? Juan, can you tell us a bit when we are expecting to publish this?
Yes, as I said before, I think we are working with the sector in the CCS TSI working party. A first update is expected early next year, early 2024, and we are focusing on the Appendix B, on the error corrections, and then in the Appendix Z. Then a follow-up, a second update is planned mid-2024, considering ATO, also FRMCS guidelines and the publication on a first set of the subsets that are informative. And then during the rest of 2024, we will be covering the rest of topics of CCS TSI. So several stages during 2024. First one, we expect to have them ready by early in the year. And of course, we will consider, as I said also, that all inputs and all questions, some of them are complex, but then we will consider them and try to address them somehow in the application guide.
Thank you. Many thanks for the explanation, Juan. I think we're coming close to the end of our webinar. We do have a lot of questions. There are more questions, and I'm happy that those are coming in. But those questions may require a bit more of analysis, and we will not be able to answer all of them today. What we're going to try and do is we compile the questions, we'll try and provide the feedback to them. If anything, please contact us, email us, and we'll try to do our best to answer them. I would like to thank my colleagues for the presentations that they have done here today. It was amazing. We hope that we have tried to at least answer most of the questions that we received from the sector and from applicants and the industry in general. And before I finish, I would like to thank also the participation of my colleagues here who have supported us on this webinar. And I will now pass the floor back to Cyrielle, who will conclude our webinar session for today. Many thanks. Cyrielle, please.
Many thanks, Joao. I would also like to thank warmly, so you first, Joao, then Antoine, Nordine, Juan, of course, for your work, dedication in preparing for this event. In the backstage, I would also like to thank Wouter Malfet, David Cuesta Gomez, Dorothea Spapen, Juan Archanco, and Said Rajpu. Thank you very much for your support, because this is a teamwork. Dear attendees, dear speakers, all good things must come to an end. We really hope that you enjoyed this Q&A session and that it fulfilled your expectations. Thank you for attending this event in such large numbers. As we do for webinars, this Q&A session has been recorded and will be made available on our website in the coming hours. Before you go, we would be very happy to receive your feedback on this event via the QR code you're seeing right now on the screen. And we look forward to meeting you again at one of our upcoming events and training. First, let me remind you of the dates for the upcoming Q&A sessions dedicated to TSIs. You are more than welcome to send your questions to the email address displayed on the screen. Next, tomorrow, an important conference for the agency, the third multimodal conference, will commence in Hamburg, Germany. We still have a few spots available for those who are interested, so don't hesitate to register. You can find all the details on our website. The following week, the agency is organizing a crucial training on organizational just culture. I invite you to visit our website for all the details and the registration information. At the same time, the agency is pleased to participate in the third ERA ENISA conference on cybersecurity in Athens, Greece. I would be very happy to meet you there. Then, for women's eyes only, if you're interested in a career in railways, you are more than welcome to join us for the second round of our speed networking session. Based on the success of the first edition, we give you another opportunity to ask questions one-to-one with women working directly in the railway sector. Please note that places are limited. You can find all the details you need to register on our website. Last but not least, the agency is pleased to announce that the 2024 edition of the ERTMS conference will take place from 23rd to 25th April 2024. All details regarding this conference, namely its location, will be announced as soon as possible, but you can already save the date. Having said that, and if you would like to stay updated on our activities, please check our website and sign into our database by selecting the button Login on our website page. And you can, of course, follow us whenever you want on our website and our social media accounts, Twitter and LinkedIn. I thank you very much for your attention. I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye.